Thank you for the introduction. My name is Dylan Collins. I'm the CEO of Super Awesome. Actually, we now reach about 500 million kids every month. Just saying, if you're counting. If you're counting. So I have kind of an unusual background in the sense that I'm CEO of Super Awesome, but I'm also an investor in probably about a dozen, maybe closer to 20 different companies around the world. In the kid tech space, in digital media, in general technology. So I have sort of a very unusual both sides of the table perspective on what's going on. So the kid space, and specifically what has now become known as the kid tech industry, we've been investing in for about the last 5 years. So we started Super Awesome 5 years ago this month. Yeah, it was a bit of a shock to us when we discovered that also. But we started this company in 2013 when, you know, digital activity in the kid space was probably about like 2% of everything that was being done. Is this mic okay? Is the sound all right? I got a weird echo here, but you guys good? Okay, fine. So like in 2013, TV was like 98% of everything, right, in the kid space. And I used to go around, when we were pitching Super Awesome originally, I'd go around to all my Silicon Valley friends, all my VC friends, and say, hey, have this thing. It's called children, right? There's more and more of them. They're spending more and more time on the internet. We think maybe we should build some technology to do something about this. And they all went, no, not really. And we went back in 2014, and we said the same thing, and they said the same thing to us. But now in 2018, things are very, very, very different. And, you know, we, I suppose as a company, we work with about 250 companies around the world. So we're very privileged to see, you know, what everyone is doing from a digital kids perspective. So I think quite genuinely, and this sounds very self-serving, but honestly, I know more about this than you do. So let me just share a little bit of that information with sort of 10 stats, things, observations, pieces of data about what is going on in the kid tech space, which in my view is one of the hottest sectors in the world today. So, first of all, a lot of you will have seen this slide before, variations of it. It's originally from Common Sense Media. It is the growth in minutes per day that are being spent by kids on screens over the last 7 years. And I often go back to Silicon Valley and I say, hey guys, remember when we were talking here? Well, now it's up there. It's absolutely huge and shows no signs of slowing down. Here are some numbers you might not have seen before, though. Hands up, except for anyone who actually knows what they are, hands up if you know what these numbers represent. No one from Super Awesome is allowed to answer this question. Any ideas? Any guesses? Nope, not minutes spent on a device per anything. Good guesses though, all solid. Sorry, I'm not asking your answers just to belittle you for comedy effect. Promise. Okay, let me tell you. So, there's actually a 0 missing on the middle one, just realized. Shy? Who checked the slides? No, because you also know as well. So let me tell you. So we're in the UK. We're in London today. Every day in the UK, 2,000 children go online for the very first time. Every single day, right? In the United States, every single day, there are 10,000 kids going online for the first time. Every day today, 10,000 went on yesterday, and 10,000 are going on tomorrow. New kids, internet, first time, digital devices. In China, 50,000 kids every single day are going online for the first time. Now it's funny, these days when I go back to Silicon Valley and I show these to my investor friends, they go, holy shit, why is everyone not doing a lot in this space? And I go, I know. And they go, you guys were very clever. And I go, I know. So everyone in this room who is involved in this sector, I think you are absolutely in the right place at the right time in terms of building, you know, digital experiences, creating digital content for kids. You know, it's a tough sector, but the numbers don't lie, except for the middle one. So let's just ignore that. So from the marketing side of things, and again, I promised stats and facts and actual data. The other thing that's happening here is that digital spending by content companies, by brands, is increasing very quickly. So this is data from PwC that came out last year. Digital spending in the kids sector is now growing at about 25% year on year. So this is just in the US and the UK. So by the end of this year, you'll see about $1.2 billion being spent in the kids space. Broadly from what is described as marketing budgets, but that doesn't necessarily just mean advertising. The incredible thing is that TV spending is still about 85% of this market. But it is only decreasing over time because unfortunately, and many of the people in media companies are my friends, kids are not going to start watching more linear TV ever again. It's just not going to happen. But this is also the very last sector to make an actual shift from TV across to digital. So this is going to be essentially the fastest growing digital media space for probably at least the next 5 years. Now, there's two things here that are actually really, really interesting coming off the back of it. One is that even though you are seeing, is there a laser thing on this? We have lasers, this is incredible. Even though you are seeing more and more spending, what's happening is that when you look at the actual data, and this comes from Karu in the US, kids are actually seeing less ads online. So what's going on there? That's kind of strange, right? More and more time being spent on screens, more and more money coming in from the marketing side of things, but kids are seeing less ads. It's not actually about ad blocking. What's happening that if you look at all the new investment that's going into kids' content, a huge amount is going into kids' content that doesn't have advertising. A huge amount of it is going into subscription-based content. So if you can imagine two graphs that are going up and to the right, one is the increase in actual content, and the second is the increase in the available advertising opportunities. There's a bigger and bigger and bigger gap that's happening. And this is particularly interesting. We don't really know what it means yet, but it probably means that advertising is going to get more expensive in this space, you know, because supply is being limited. But it's an interesting observation nonetheless. The other thing that's happening, as I said, sort of off the back of this, is that marketing in the kid space, when it was under about 10%, was basically just advertising and monetization if you were a content owner. As budgets are increasing and companies are sort of thinking a lot more about how to engage kids, they're now starting to invest more and more in games, in sort of interactive content, in apps, in services. So over the next 12 to 18 months, you are going to see a lot of major announcements coming out about companies that have been secretly working on very interesting platforms and apps and services for kids. We know this because we're involved in an awful lot of them. Can't say anything about them at all, but we're coming into sort of this new renaissance of kids' apps and experiences because there's more tools, there's more tech, there's more children, there's a better sort of economic models in terms of making it sustainable. It's going to be a pretty cool 12 or 18 months in this space. So it's you know, the kids' content and kids' digital sector has always been known as being super hard. It's probably not going to ever get easy, but it's definitely starting to step up in terms of becoming bigger and from an investment perspective being seen as much more commercially viable. The other thing, which is, and I mean, Shai said we were going to end talking about GDPR and GDPR-K at the end of the day. Don't worry, we'll make it exciting, I promise. I'm Shai's funny man, basically, to sort of help make data privacy fun and entertaining. The big thing that's changed in the kid space over the last 12 months is that we have gone from essentially one set of data privacy standards for kids, which was COPPA in the US, to now effectively a global standard. So we have GDPR-K in Europe, which sets a framework across all of the EU, including the UK, regardless of Brexit, in case you're wondering. But also China. China passed data privacy law for kids about 2 months ago. It's probably something that most of you in this room haven't heard of. And in fact, you know, data privacy in China are never really words I thought I was going to utter in the same sentence in my entire life. But it is actually there. And they've set the age of a child at 14. So we now have, in the last 12 months, the emergence of a global standard for kids' data privacy, which makes it a lot easier for everyone to operate on. And as part of that, we are seeing the class actions starting to emerge. So in the US last year, we saw the first civil class actions being taken against a whole bunch of different companies. We saw a class action being filed against YouTube a couple of weeks ago. Under GDPR and GDPRK in Europe, the same thing is going to happen here. So you're going to see lots of lawsuits against lots of big companies and probably medium-sized companies too for capturing kids' data in ways that they shouldn't be, which is basically any way whatsoever. So if you are in the legal profession, congratulations, it's now your time to shine. So this is something that's only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Good news is that, 4 or 5 years ago, the kids ecosystem in terms of, tools for developers and tools for content owners and, tools and platforms for basically anyone building anything in the kids' digital space were pretty much non-existent. And, if you look at sort of the main contributors to the ecosystem overall, you got 3 things, right? You got the data privacy laws, which are kind of doing their own thing, and politicians are being politicians and rolling them out. You got the hardware companies, so the phone manufacturers, Apple, Samsung, etc., and they're trying to solve some of this from an operating system perspective. And then you got the software companies who are trying to sort of solve the problems here by releasing developer tools and third-party tools and everything else. 5 years ago, 4 years ago, there really wasn't much in the software bucket. Now we are seeing more and more that is being created. But it's not being created by Silicon Valley, which is really interesting. So, we've seen what happens when Silicon Valley tries to get kids. They really struggle with it. This is a set of data from Kids Insights, which came out in Q1 this year. And it's not an actual app ranking by download. It's asking kids, hey, which app do you prefer to use? So if you see here for sort of the preschool 4 to 6, YouTube Kids is kind of coming up second. 7 to 9, you can see that there's only 2/3 of kids that are actually relating to YouTube Kids. And then as they get up to sort of about 9 or 10, it drops right to the bottom here, right? Fundamental issue is that the big technology companies struggle with building for children. Silicon Valley has never really got kids for a number of reasons, not because they're evil, but because in many cases you've got a lot of sort of single developers who don't have kids, so they don't have a frame of reference for it. You have got companies that have adult business models based on personal data, and it's actually too hard to build something that's purely for kids. But as a result, you're seeing stuff that is being built and put out in the ecosystem which isn't really working to support the actual industry and everything else. So I think this is one of the only sectors, I would say, where for all of you in the room who are startups and doing interesting things, you have got a timing and positioning advantage against the likes of Google and Facebook and maybe even Amazon and maybe even Apple. And that very, very, very rarely happens in my experience. The other thing we're seeing kind of at the same time is that, whenever the big techcos try and do something, A, they either do it badly, or B, they're becoming a lightning rod, for all this kind of criticism, right? So when Facebook released Messenger for kids, everyone went, shit, I'm not going to let my kids use that. That seems like a terrible idea. When YouTube released and updated and updated and updated YouTube for kids, everyone went, okay, this is great, but what do you mean there's like a 1% chance that something terrible can slip through into this dedicated kids app? That is not a great idea. So what we're starting to see right now is the beginning of the decline of Facebook and Google's brand and trust within the family space. And I think this is going to be very, very, very hard to walk this back. So again, if you're building a new company in this sector or you are a content brand in this sector, it is one of the very few places where you are going to have a strategic advantage against two companies which have effectively infinite resources. I think that's pretty cool. Let me show you some data on this, which we only just got back 2 weeks ago, less, 1 week ago. So we asked, because we were kind of curious about the real impact of this, so we asked an independent research agency to go and speak to about 60 or 70 super awesome clients. So these are professionals working in the kids' digital space. And we asked them, how do they think about trust with all the various big brands that they normally work with? So we asked them about Disney, we asked them about Nickelodeon, we asked them about Super Awesome, we asked them about Facebook, and we asked them about Google. So these are informed professionals. They work with these tools and tech companies every single day, right? So they are not sort of an average person on the street. This was an informed opinion. And we asked them, how much do you trust them in the context of their own children or with nieces or nephews if they didn't have children? These are the results. You should really tweet the shit out of this graph. So it's pretty amazing. So what's happening here, there's two stories. One is that, you know, the really strong brands in the kids space, so the Disneys and Nickelodeons, are ranking higher in terms of trust with all of the professionals in the space. Super Awesome's up there as well, because that's what we stand for. This isn't about us. What's really interesting is what's going on down here with YouTube and Facebook. So YouTube and Facebook, by professionals who work with them, people who are much more educated about this than anyone else would be, massively distrust both Facebook and YouTube when it comes to their own kids, right? And this is a proxy for what's going on everywhere. So there's a real battle. I think over the next 10 years, one of the big battles in this space is going to be who is going to be the trusted digital brand in families. Because the one, I make very few promises or guarantees in life, but one of them I will make to you today, you can hold me to it, is that it is not going to be Facebook or Google who is that trusted family digital brand. It's simply not going to happen. Sorry, this is a bit of a self-serving point, but I think, and it's to what, it's really sort of supporting what Shai said when he opened up. You know, kid tech is a category that has really only emerged in the last 2 or 3 years. And the reason I've got headlines on the screen is not to talk about us, but to reflect the fact that now when companies are describing Super Awesome, they refer to us as a kid tech company. They talk about the kid tech sector. They talk about the kid tech category. And that's really important, particularly if you're a startup, because, you know, investors want to understand what is your industry, what is going on within that environment. So I think any time that you are talking to a journalist or anyone from the media, it's always important to sort of reinforce the fact that what we do is in the kid tech space. I think Shai has done incredible work in terms of actually building awareness up over the brand. He continues to argue that he owns it, and I keep saying, no, it's an industry thing, but you know, we'll agree to disagree on that, right? But it is really, really emerging as a space, and the Financial Times ranked us pretty highly recently in a listing, and again, it was the first time that we're seeing kid tech actually emerging, you know, within something as conservative as the Financial Times as a recognized place. Home straight. Growth investment in the sector is growing, and this is really important. So there's lots of seed investment, there's lots of angel investment that's going on, you know, in terms of raising like tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars. But in the last 12 months, we've started to see some notable growth investment go into some of the companies. So Roblox last year raised about 92 million from Meritech and Index. We raised about 21 million from Mayfair Equity middle of last year. Hopster has raised a pretty big round from Sony Pictures. Tech Will Save Us has raised a round this year of about $4.5 million. You know, these are not things that you were seeing 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. What's also really interesting is the kind of money that's going in. So if you look at the Roblox deal, you know, that was sort of classic growth VC money that was going in. Index and Meritech. You look at the Super Awesome deal, it was private equity money that was going in, taking a minority stake. If you look at Hopster, it was strategic money going in, taking a stake. So these are all very, very good signals. This is more and more people understanding what's going on in this space and actually writing checks. You know, it's a really, really, really good signal. The final point I will make is the age of a child is going to change. So with GDPR and GDPRK, Europe basically split half between choosing 13 as the age of a child, the other half of Europe choosing 16 as the age of a child. Now, practically, if you're talking to anyone operating across Europe, I think that means that everyone's going to have to default to 16, because it's going to be quite difficult to sort of split between those two things. A bill has just come up in Congress in the US, which is essentially going to be an extension of COPPA. It's called the Do Not Track bill, and it is proposing that children now essentially be defined at 16. And I think the fact that China even picked an age that was higher than the US in terms of the definition of a child means that over the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, regardless of how well this US discussion goes, we are going to be talking about data privacy laws for kids at a higher threshold than before, which means for those of you operating in the space, this is a larger addressable audience. So we are at a very, very, very interesting inflection point, I would nearly say, in this sector. So hopefully that was an interesting walk through all the things that I'm seeing or I'm in the middle of. I'm always happy to help if you guys have got questions or want to talk about investment or anything else like that. I'm around kind of in and out for most of the day. Also, Shai and I are going to be having a spirited argument about GDPR-K at the end of the day, which I do recommend you hang around for. So thank you.
I just want to ask, how do you deal with the issue of verifying the age of kids when they access apps, on their own?
Short answer is, well, we have pieces of technology that you can implement that does verified parental consent. So there's a specific workflow there to do it and pieces of technology that can make that happen. So companies are typically age gating, sort of, asking what age a child is, and then if they want to do any kind of data collection for something that's appropriate, you have to go through a parental consent mechanism, and the parent has to verify their own ID. It sounds a little bit complicated. It is. That's why we kind of turned it into a product that you can plug into things.
So if they lie about their age, there's nothing you can do about that?
Kids lying about their age is unfortunately a thing that's going to continue. I think the biggest, one of the biggest things that you're going to see change over the next 2 or 3 years is that the way that mainstream consumer platforms are built will be different. So if you think about YouTube and Facebook, right, they were mostly built 10 years ago when there were like a tiny fraction of kids online. Kids just weren't an audience realistically. If you were building YouTube or Facebook today, you would be designing for the fact that at least a third or maybe half your audience are going to be kids, and you would think about it differently. And that's what you're going to see with the mainstream platforms that are now being built. This is not a, it's not a problem that gets fixed overnight. It's something that gets fixed long term with people realizing that kids are now a huge part of the internet and designing to reflect that fact.
Hi. Based on the information you have from Super Awesome, could you speak a little bit about, I would say, the most popular kid apps in terms of whether this are puzzle games right now or emulators or the other type of the games? So what kids like to do right now? What they are most engaged? If it's possible, of course.
I mean, how much time have you got? I mean, I can point you to some stuff, but very broadly, it's a lot of video content. It's a lot of games content. I think you are starting to see, again, if you look at sort of the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, kids have been using a lot of stuff that they maybe should or shouldn't have been on. So they're kind of repurposing stuff that they've seen their older siblings use. I think you're gradually starting to see the emergence, as I said, of kind of new platforms that are designed for kids without screaming out the word kids, if you know what I mean. Like, we're sort of entering from a digital design perspective, I think, with apps and games, we're entering into what I call the Nickelodeon phase, right? Which is where you create great non-patronizing kids content that is then used by kids because it's not patronizing, right? When you're sort of an engineer building stuff, it's very easy, and you see this around the world, to sort of build for the idea of a kid rather than actually what a kid wants, if you know what I mean. So I would say that the direction of travel is very much towards video content. But I think games continues to be a huge thing as well. If you want more detail, I can email you some stuff.
Hi, you were talking about the growth of screens and stuff like that, and from the Common Sense Media Report, that's actually it comes instead of TV. Kids are just watching the same content on a screen, so. Kids are basically doing the same thing. They're just using different media for it. So how do you see the difference in terms of all the things you were talking about in terms of the media type? So is it different when they're on Netflix, which is basically TV, or playing a video game, a multi-massive user, or going online, or?
I think that the difference, because you're absolutely right, a lot of the content they're watching on devices is, what would traditionally been referred to as TV content. I think probably the big difference is this button in the middle of the device, right? The ability to flip between, to context switch into another app was never there. And that's the big difference, right? It's switching in and out of things and sort of doing 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 things in parallel, which frankly we all do as well. But it can be much more pronounced with kids. I also think in terms of trends with kids, and again, this is nothing new, but like you'll see digital trends like spike on a very localized basis, because you literally have sort of playground to playground, which won't necessarily be nationally reflected in terms of what kids are doing, right? So I would say that if you just look at the overall content consumption, it's still there. But if you were to actually look at if you were to slice into the actual viewing sessions, you would see a lot more sessions at smaller times as they hop and check other things and bounce into games and things like that. Also depends on the age. Huge difference, obviously, between preschool and sort of 6 to 8 and then 9 to 12. All right, I'm being kicked off, but thank you all.